Okay, I'm ready. What's going on, guys? Sensible Prepper Live, Prepper School Volume 44. Thanks, Robbie.
You're welcome.
That was that's just awesome. 44.
I've been waiting 43 episodes to do that.
What are you going to do with 99? We're done going crazy. Great to have you guys with us. We really appreciate it. And have Robbie Wheaton here from Wheaton Arms, also Wheaton Arms YouTube channel. Check it out. Been a gunsmith for over 20 years and knows a lot about guns. And that's really a cool thing on his web or his YouTube channel.
Yep.
Is he takes a kind of a different perspective and really excited. Plus, WheatonArms.com, they have Glock aftermarket parts and the flat face trigger is the best on the market, period, for an aftermarket. That match trigger flat face is just beautiful. Plus, you're doing all the dagger upgrades for the Palmetto State Armory, which for theirs. So he's doing these parts for Palmetto State Armory to upgrade their daggers.
Yep, we've got the new dagger blade trigger system that's going to be coming out any day now. As soon as they finish it with photography and get that rolled out, so they're sitting on those. I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah,
there's going to be a lot of really happy people out there when they get their hands on
those triggers are fantastic. And so anyway, it's just a great feather in the cap, which makes it really nice. But they also fit the Glocks as well.
That's right,
or Glock clones, or
all the Gen 1 through 4s, correct.
So you need to check those out. And if you have a Glock and you buy one, and if you have two Glocks, you'll want another one. But we're in Sarah Max over at the computer. She will be taking questions when we take a couple of breaks. Today we're going to talk a little bit something different.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, well, I knew this was in your wheelhouse as well, and guys, this could have gone on the Sootch channel, but I just thought that it's important because optics are important, and there's a lot of choices. It's confusing as heck. I mean,
especially if you're new to firearms,
right?
There's so many different options available out there that you really, if you're not experienced with what you're looking at, you're really overwhelmed.
Right. I mean, you don't see it here, but we've got a table full of optics, and we're just going to talk about it. Now, we're not going to talk about any kind of brands. We will be talking a little bit about quality.
Yep.
But we're not going to be necessarily speaking of brands. We'll be bringing up some names probably. But there are a lot of options. There are high-end options. I mean, very expensive scopes out there. And there are budget options. And the budgets sometimes are good, sometimes are solid.
Yeah.
And then you have budgets that won't hold up.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of different type scopes out there. So we just wanted to go through some ideas if you're looking for an optic. Because here's the thing about optics. And they did a big study with the U.S. military talking about optics versus irons, and the advantages hugely outweigh any kind of deficit. I mean, having an optic on your firearm gives you a big advantage.
It does. The hit factor goes way, way up with optics versus iron sights on a firearm, especially the further out you get. The longer the distance is, your hit probability is much higher with a magnified optic or even a red dot than it is with just iron sights.
Right. I mean, and we're going to start out with just, we're going to start out with backup iron sights or just standard iron sights.
We go.
I mean, that's a good thing. You need to be able to shoot guns with iron sights.
You do. And some of you may have heard the term online or seen it typed out somewhere, BUIS, BUIS. That is an abbreviation for backup iron sights. And it doesn't matter if it's for a handgun, rifle, shotgun, or whatever. BUIS are just backup iron sights for your optic.
Right. And, Magpul, they even call those the BUIS,
That's right.
Backup iron sights. And, having, especially if you're running an AR-15 or something like that, it's really good to have them because optics can fail. And so you want to make sure that you have something that you can rely on if that happens.
Well, even way back in the day with, your hunting rifles in the 70s and the 80s and maybe even into the early 90s, a lot of your scope rings had a large opening below the ring and then the scope rings on top where you could still use your iron sights in case your optic failed.
Right, the see-through sights.
Right, because optic quality, even 30 years ago, was suspect in a lot of cases unless you were buying really high-end optics.
Right. I mean, reticles can fail. Things can happen.
Yep.
And especially if you're running a red dot. If you're running just a standard red dot, electronics can fail. I mean, it makes it easy. You could drop this, you could bust it.
Battery could go dead.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of things, especially now. One of the things about red dots, I personally like etched reticles for my red dots, and that way, if the dot goes out, I still have a point of aim.
That's right.
And so this is very important. In fact, there was a story in World War II where it was a bonsai charge on one of the South Pacific Islands, and the guy pulled up his rifle and his sight was bent off. And so he was having to figure out where he was shooting.
Little Kentucky windage.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, but without even, I mean, it was elevation and windage. It was like, man, he was shooting all over the place. And he finally figured it out and they were able to stop the charge because he was a point man. But
you know, that's the thing. A lot of times, if you can see your impact, see where the round hits, and know where in what angle you were looking down the barrel, it's once you know where that round hits, it's pretty easy to adjust from there, even at distance. You know, if you're shooting like a 240 or a 249 saw or a Mark 19 grenade launcher, you know, if you're shooting those at distance, a lot of times you adjust based off of your impacts, or you adjust based off of your tracers.
Right.
Because the recoil of the gun will actually blur your vision, especially on a 249.
Right.
It'll blur your vision when you shoot it. So you really can't see the sights, but you can still see the tracers going down range. So you adjust based off of the tracer impact.
Right. But since we could get tracers, but since that's not typically the norm, you know, having backup iron sights are just a great way to go.
Sorry, squirrel.
No, that's fine. That was interesting, actually. But, you know, having those backup iron sights. Now, one of the things, there's a lot of choices when it comes to micro red dots. You know, you can go with the aim points, which are typically pretty expensive, or even Trijicon.
Yep.
I mean, those are fairly expensive. One of the things I do like about Trijicon typically is they do have reticles in some of their sights, but now in some of their, and we're not going to get into necessarily micro red dots that go on handguns.
Right.
That's a matter of choice because typically you're shooting at a close range, but micro red dots are becoming extremely popular on handguns.
A lot of your law enforcement agencies are switching over to micro red dots. Our county where we live have all switched to micro red dots. I had a county, a couple of counties over from us, call me last week about us milling all of their slides on their Glocks for micro red dots.
Which that's one thing that Wheaton Arms also does.
Yeah, but it's becoming much more popular. And the biggest reason why you're starting to see a surge in popularity in micro red dots on handguns are the micro red dots have finally got to the point that they're reliable. They'll work and they'll last without breaking. You know, I started shooting red dots on handguns back in the late 90s in USPSA competition. And back then, the only red dot that was durable enough to last through competitions and, you know, thousands and thousands of rounds of training was the Seymour. And it had sealed electronics in it. It was big. It was huge. I mean, it was like probably 4 inches long and actually bolted to the frame itself of the pistol.
Wow.
But they worked. You know, they were big and bulky and robust, but they were durable and they lasted. And, you know, that's been 98. It's been over 20 years to get to the point that we are today, to where we're finally starting to see these micro red dots that are reliable enough and durable enough to stand up to everyday carry and the rigors of competition.
But, you know, the Trijicon RMR really kind of started everything with those micro red dots.
Absolutely set the bar with that one.
But they were as expensive as some handguns.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's really nice to see, especially Holosan. Holosan has really kind of taken a lead in doing a lot of things. So, again, we're not going to talk about handgun sights, but we're going to talk about handgun sights.
Squirrel number 2.
That's fine. But you can use those micro red dots on rifles.
Yes.
The one thing you want to do when you're putting a red dot on a rifle, because I have one of my AR-15s is set up with a Trijicon RMR. It has a 1 MOA dot. And that's one of the things on your handgun, you want a larger MOA.
Right.
With a rifle, you want a smaller MOA.
So, and what MOA is, that's minute of angle or 1 inch at 100 yards. So for every MOA that dot size is, that's the amount of your target surface that dot's going to cover at 100 yards. A 1 MOA dot is going to cover 1 inch. A 6 MOA dot will cover 6 inches at 100 yards, which is a lot.
Yeah, especially in a rifle, because you're going to typically shoot longer ranges. So, you know, that's a very important thing, because a lot of times you look at MOA and you're just like, I'll take a 3.
Yeah.
I'll take a 4. Hey, what the heck?
What you got in stock today?
What's the,
you know?
And it kind of allows you to kind of focus in with the 3 or the 4 on a pistol. You're going to get a little better accuracy. With a rifle, though, it's very important because if you're at 100 yards and you're looking at a 4 MOA, that's 4 inches. That'll cover up your target.
Yep.
And so, just keep that in mind when you're looking at red dots, that you want a smaller MOA for a rifle typically. And then some of the 9mm, you could probably go with a little bit bigger.
And, just kind of put it in perspective, a 4 MOA dot covers 4 inches at 100 yards. It covers 2 inches at 50 yards. It only covers 1 inch at 25 yards, which is 25 yards is probably going to be the extreme side of your handgun distance that you'd be shooting it in a defensive situation.
That's true. That's a good point. That's why Robbie earns his pay.
Brought my big brain today.
Okay, so red dots. Now there are a lot of different type micro red dots. They're the small ones, and then there are some of the larger ones. This is from Primary Arms. It's the Cyclops. It's a large, but this is a Prism scope, and Prism scopes are made to be super robust. You can hardly you probably could if you ran over with a tank, but they're really tough and they really hold up. And that's one of the things, especially with recoil.
Yep.
So a Prism scope like this, but one of the things I like about this size scope, and then here's one from Aimpoint, pretty large reticle or sight, but with the Primary Arms, it has an etched reticle. But one of the other things that I love about it is it has a diopter. And so I can adjust this to focus for my eyes.
That's right.
And the older I get, the more important that is.
Well, we see it sometimes when we go to the range and we're swapping back and forth with rifles and stuff. We both have to adjust the diopter for our eyes, because what I see looks really blurry to him and what he sees looks really blurry to me. So, we'll flop down on the bench and start shooting. First thing you do, you're cranking and cranking and cranking. You're like, oh, there it is. It's finally in focus.
So if you have issues with these micro red dots, like I see a bloom, I see a starburst, you could have astigmatism. There can be a lot of things that can cause this to look like you can't even really focus.
And I'm glad you brought up astigmatism. That's one thing that a lot of people have with their eyes. They have an astigmatism. A lot of your red dots that have a red dot, you'll either see a figure 8 or you'll see 2 separate individual dots inside the scope. Try looking at a green dot instead of the red dot. Generally, the green dot, even with astigmatism, your eye can focus on that and it won't starburst or twist or split into 2 different dots.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because a lot of guys are talking about that this past weekend. But, there are some other options. So don't just necessarily settle. I mean, somebody goes, oh, I want a T2 Aimpoint because it's the deal. But what you see is what you get. You don't get any adjustment. And there are other scopes out there, not just this Primary Arms, that have that reticle that you can adjust. And then again, this one has the etched reticle. And they do make the SLX, which is their new versions, which I have them mounted on rifles. I really like that optic. That one, it has the diopter. It's smaller. It's more toward this size, and yet it has an etched reticle. So again, we weren't going to talk necessarily about brands, but if that is an issue that you have, that's something that you really need to think about. And there is a fix for it.
And I tell you a big thing with red dots that a lot of people they'll mount a red dot way back where it's right here in front of your eye. All right. Like this. In a defensive situation, so I'm left eye dominant. I've got the tube mounted up here really close to my left eye. Well, it forces me to have tunnel vision where I'm looking directly through the scope and I don't see what's going on around me. When you mount a red dot, you always want to mount a red dot forward so you see through it, but you still have your peripheral vision out around it as well.
That's good. Yeah, because that is one thing about an optic is kind of bring it here.
It'll suck you right into the tube.
Right.
It will.
And it gives you eye fatigue.
Yep.
So that is an excellent point. So, there's a ton of different now. One of the things we don't actually have right here on the table is a holographic sight, like an EOTech.
Yep.
And there are a number of different companies that make them now.
Yeah. Where's the night vision stuff, dude?
That's later. Oh, I didn't bring that up. Yeah, I've got a big Night Fighter 101 coming up.
That's another episode, right?
Yeah, that's all. Well, we did one earlier a little bit about it,
Yep.
but we're going to talk a little bit about it toward the end. But first off, and these are zero magnification. This is just zero magnification. Now, I do want to say something about that particularly is that with a lot of these sights, we can shoot man-sized targets at 300 yards without any problem with a red dot. So, if you're looking for a scope and you're like, man, I really need to get some magnification to get out there, you don't necessarily.
Yeah. the biggest downside that I found to a red dot once you start getting out at distance isn't necessarily making hits. It's actually target identification. Once you get out,
good point.
Once you 200 yards, not an issue. Once you get out past 200, you get to 250, you get to 300. If the lighting is right, sunlight's right, cloudy day or whatever, it's easy to make reliable hits when the targets are lit up. When the targets slide back into the shade, they can disappear on you with a red dot. You just won't be able to see them. So inside of 300, the red dot works well. You get outside of 300 without some magnification. If the lighting conditions are correct, they work awesome. If the lighting conditions are not, you're going to struggle to be able to see the targets to hit them.
Now, there's also, speaking of which, magnifiers.
Yep.
And magnifiers are great because you can take these and you can pop these out of the way.
Nice segue, huh?
And this really just goes, if I can actually work this one, it's not mounted, so it makes it more difficult. But, oh, there it goes. Okay, so this one, I can put it on I have my red dot in front. I have this out of the way for close quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I need to do something, I can just push this and I can bring it back and line it up with my red dot. So this gives me 3x magnification or just open sights with just the red dot. And so this is something that a lot of people like to have on their firearms. AR-15s especially, it makes it really nice.
And, I like the magnifiers. The magnifiers work well. I love being able to fold them out of the way and be able to just use the dot, flip it over for magnification when I need the magnification. The only downside is you're basically adding 2 optics on top of your rifle, and it adds a lot of weight to your rifle.
Right, and just bulk.
It's bulk and weight is the biggest things that you're adding when you add the magnifiers.
I mean, let's face it, guys. We can come in, with something large on our AR-15.
Yep.
And to me, what I like to do is to get the smallest optic that can be the most effective.
Mm-hmm.
And it really matters more. It's a personal preference thing, I think, or what you think you might need. But red dots, again, you can get out to 300 yards. Like Robbie said, there may be some target identification on out there. The magnifier would definitely help. Again, prisms, which are on the list as well. These are built like tanks. They're really strong. And so, but now one thing too, and I do want to mention this. Let's take this primary arms, which these are excellent optics for the money.
Yeah.
But then we have an aim point. And, the thing is with aim points, they go through a really rigorous testing period. They're usually, they can serve in the U.S. military because they've gone through a lot of trials.
That's right. Generally, they have around a 1 AA battery. They have 80 to 100,000 hours of runtime. So you can put a AA in it, turn it on, leave it on for 10 years, and then replace it. Replace the AA battery in it.
Well, but the 2032s,
mm-hmm.
This one particular has it's got a 50,000 hour battery life too. So they've really upped.
They have
a lot of the battery life on these. But the one thing about the aim point and I haven't actually compared these two together, but glass is vital.
Optical clarity.
And that's one of the things a lot of people, one of the mantras or just kind of the rules for optics is that the optics should cost as much as your firearm. Now, a lot of people are like, well, I'm not paying that, and I understand. But I was out at Nothing Fancy a few years ago for an all-star shoot, and we were out in the desert, and we were shooting targets 300 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this gray plate, and it was next to these bushes, and you couldn't even see it. I mean, you really couldn't pick it up with the optic I was using. And I kept looking and looking. Somebody handed me a Trijicon ACOG, and I went, oh, there it is. Ding, 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 ding. And I was able to hit it.
Mm-hmm.
The glass clarity will focus in. It will allow you to get the detail so much better.
That's right. That's one of the biggest things that I look at when I'm looking at a magnified optic is the clarity of the glass, as well as the F factor, how much light the scope can draw in. The higher the F factor, the more light the scope can draw in. But what you want to look at with a magnified optic when you're looking for glass clarity is how clear is it at the edges. There's a lot of times what you'll see, you'll look through the center and the middle of the scope looks good. You're like, oh, it looks really clear. Start looking toward the outside edges. When companies use less than quality glass, you'll start seeing cloudiness, or you'll start seeing fuzziness or blurriness on the edges. And when I say the edge, it can be anywhere from a 1/16 of an inch all the way around to a quarter of an inch all the way around that you see looking through the scope where it starts getting cloudy. And a lot of times that's where you pay more for your optics, or with the clarity of the glass.
Well, with primary arms, and I keep bringing those up because we do a lot of primary arms optics. I mean, they're just excellent. They're medium price scopes. They're not really budget. They're medium price, but they have a really great quality control. And Dimitri, who does all their reticles, actually tests the reticles physically out in the desert and sets those. I mean, and I don't know of any other company that actually does that.
They put a lot of time and effort into their scopes as well as their optics before they release them.
Right. But one thing they do have is a premium line. They have their premium line optics, and those are Japanese glass, and they are really good. They're expensive, but they're really good. Okay, so that's pretty much I want to kind of go through some red dots first, and we've kind of gone through a lot of that. Let's go ahead and we're going to go to some questions in just a few minutes, because I want to let Sarah Mack make sure she's ready for them. And then we'll take a break. So if you have some questions, you want to throw those up. But one thing I do love about smaller optics is you have a handy rifle. Let's say you're carrying an AR-15, and you're not going to put this on a hunting rifle or bolt action. Well, you could, but hopefully you're.
What's on my Marlin 336?
What? One of those.
It's a 100-yard bush gun.
Oh, well, that's different.
And that's what it's designed for. Is the rifle is made for quick, lightweight, easy to pack, and I've got a red dot on it for that reason.
Right.
If I'm carrying that rifle, if I take that rifle hunting, it's something that I'm going to have up. And a lot of times I'm just doing some spot and stalk in some thicker brush and woods, and it'll be a situation where I see a deer and I've got just a second to snap the rifle up, acquire it, and take the shot.
And you have more periphery, so if that deer runs, you can track it a little better or do whatever.
And with the optic mounted forward on the rifle, I've got all of my peripheral vision out here in front of me, as well as still being able to see the sight.
Kind of like a scout setup.
It is a lot like a scout setup.
One thing too about red dots, they're great for shotgun.
Yes.
If you have one on a shotgun, you're able to really find it. And
I tell you, if you've ever shot sporting clays with iron sights and you go and shoot sporting clays with a red dot, it is absolutely cheating. Most of your sanctioned bodies won't allow them. Because it's so much easier with a red dot than it is without.
Right, I'm sure. And two, you just have that front bead. So back here you have it a little closer and you're able to get to it. So red dots, awesome, and they do have a lot of capability, but they do have their limitations.
They do.
And so then we're going to get into some magnified optics and kind of talk about that a little bit. All right, Sarah Mack, what you got?
Brian Johnson asked, AR-15, scope or red dot, can you recommend a decent scope under 300?
Yep. And it really depends on what you're wanting to do with it. If you're planning on shooting inside of 200, 225 yards, I would say go with a red dot. If you're going to shoot past 225, I would look at a low power variable, something in the 1 to 6 power range. And Primary Arms makes a excellent scope. That is, they make the 1x6, and then they've also got a 4x14 with an illuminated reticle and several different reticle options for the 5.56. That's under $300.
Or you can go with a red dot with a magnifier,
right?
But you can go with a 1 to 6, 1 to 8. 1 to 4s were real popular at first, but they've kind of moved to the 1 to 6 because it's about the same size.
That's right.
What I love about it is like you have a red dot at 1 power, and it's not typically true 1 power. It's usually 1.25 or 1.5, but it's still right in there.
Yep.
So it makes it easy to be able to get up close, and then you can get out to distance if you want to bump it up.
Well, what I found with a lot of scopes that are like what they call a true 1 power, they actually demagnify some. So things look, like the mirror on your car. Objects are closer than they appear.
Yeah.
It's the same way. It'll actually demagnify about half a power, and things look further away than they actually are.
That's interesting. Oh, but yeah, I mean, the one thing is with the question, we need to stay on the question, is this is great, and it comes in 30 millimeter. You can get them 34 millimeter, which just allows for more light.
That's right.
Transmission.
A little more adjustability with your elevation as well and windage.
Right. And the ACSS reticle in here is incredible.
Yep.
But it is large. And so you've got to weigh it out. Do you want something this large? I mean, which this isn't as large as a lot of different scopes and is long, but it's still a large optic. And so it's according to that, how you want to set it up. And that's the reason why there's so many different ones.
Mr. Lamfield asked, question, what is a reliable hunting rifle for a budget prepper?
The Savage Model 110 or Savage Model 112s are some of the best rifles that you can get for the money. They're extremely accurate right out of the box. They generally come with a synthetic stock. You can get them in stainless steel or blued finishes. The stainless steel finishes is really durable, and I think you can get them with a scope for about $399.
That's a deal. And Savage, just because of the price, again, they are. I've had a lot of different Savages through here, and they are excellent, and they are highly accurate. And if they have their Accu-Trigger on it, it is a phenomenal trigger. So, yeah, I don't know that anybody can really beat Savage as far as
I
budget
think
quality.
For the price point and the accuracy that you get out of a Savage, I think they're head and shoulders above everyone else in the industry.
Yeah.
Rockford F-150 base asked, what's the best RMR or red dot for the Shadow Systems MR 920?
That's a nice gun.
So I personally like the Primary Arms 507C with the ACSS reticle. It's got a large circle that when you present the pistol to shoot it, you don't see the large circle. All you see is a little chevron in the center. If your sight is off to one side or the other, you'll see an edge of the circle that tells you which way to steer the sight back to line the center chevron up.
And it's actually the Holosun, but Holosun makes Primary Arms red dots, which is kind of fun.
But you have to buy that one exclusively
to get the
Primary
ACSS
Arms
reticle
with the ACSS reticle.
Yeah. See, there you go. Holosun for the money. Again, that's another one that's just really doing well.
Yeah, for your micro red dots, you can't beat them.
Yeah,
cannot beat them for the price point.
John G asks, hi SM, hi Don and Robbie. Any preference on red dot color, red versus green?
Green, if you have eye stigmatisms or any kind of eye problems, they just pick up better. We kind of address that, but it's green typically is better for the eye. It's easier to pick up than red. So I would choose green.
Yeah, for me, I've got really good eyes, and red works really well for me. Green sometimes, especially here in the sunny South where we live, in the summertime, green can kind of get lost in the foliage unless you have the dot turned up really bright. So I like the contrast to a lot of the background where we live with the red. But if I had astigmatism, it would be green 100% of the time.
Well, and that's the reason why they still make red and green. So I mean, there's some great options. But for those two reasons, that would be the way I'd choose.
Frag Out Design Studios ask, how would battery operated optics hold up if an EMP happened?
The one thing about EMPs, if it's, there's a lot of theories behind it. Yeah. So, it's not necessarily, we don't really know what's going to happen. They did testing, and yes, it does fry electronics, but to what intensity?
And, I would speculate with a lot of the electronics, a lot of the red dots that we have today, because they do have miniature circuit boards in them. Excuse me. Because they have miniature circuit boards in them, that there's a good chance that an EMP would kill a red dot that has any type of circuit board or computer chip in it.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely. So for me, what I would, if I was concerned about that, which I am, I like the edged reticle.
Yep.
Because at least you have an edged reticle.
That's right. Yeah, there's still even without the red dot on the edged reticle, you still have a definitive aiming point, and that's still a usable optic for you.
Well, during the day, I don't use illuminated optics.
I very seldom do either.
I just get the daylight, and then when it starts to get low light, I'll start to bump it up.
Yep.
And that's really what they're made for.
Kevin Whitehead asked, are there red dot sights for a Glock G43 MOS without an adapter plate?
Yeah. Yes, but you have to have the slide milled. Trigicon makes one. I'm not sure what the model number of theirs is. And then Primary Arms or Holosun makes one as well. Theirs is either the 407K or the 507K. And the K is designed specifically for the narrower slides on like the SIG P365s and the Glock 43X.
Yeah, but you still have to have the slide.
Right.
Milled.
Slide has to be milled, and then it bolts directly to the slide itself.
Which we have a guy here to do that.
Gary Hernandez, Self-Defense and Urban Survival says, hi guys, with the time change happening soon, do you find yourself carrying a different EDC when you leave in the daytime because it may be night when you get back, or are you the same no matter what?
I personally just carry what I carry.
I change guns like underwear.
Well, I change guns, but if I'm going to carry it, I don't really consider that, and maybe that's a detriment. But I'm a big night sight guy. Robbie's not.
Yeah.
I like night sights on my gun. So if it's low light, it's fine. If it's not, then I have sights, iron sights. But as far as red dots, I mean, to me that would be a big advantage at night. And it's according to where I'm going as to what I'm carrying.
Right.
For me, if I'm going somewhere, that I really just put it this way, I just need to be very discreet,
Mm-hmm.
then, I have different options.
Right.
But then if I'm going to carry just normal everyday carry, I switch those things out all the time too. Like Robbie, I don't quite change them as much as underwear.
That's like normal everyday carry. A lot of times I carry a Glock 19X. And
because he's a big guy,
it's easy for me to carry and it's easy for me to conceal it. And like you were saying, if I'm going somewhere where I need to be a little more discreet, a lot of times I'll carry a North American Arms 22 Magnum. I've got a little holster for it, just slides in my front pocket and disappears. So, but it's all, a lot of that is situationally dependent.
Right. Now, typically I'll carry a SIG P365. If I want to be really discreet, appendix carry, it's easy to conceal. And then like right now I have on a P365 XL, but I have it on the outside of the waistband. That's the beautiful thing about wintertime. But seasons do change.
I've been carrying the 320 compact some. And playing with it. We've got some new upcoming stuff coming out pretty soon for the 320.
Yeah, we're looking at some different things. Okay, let's go ahead. We'll get back to some questions in a few minutes. And so if I've already asked them, hopefully we'll get to them. Okay, so next goes, and we started kind of talking about this a little bit with one of the questions, is your 1 to 4, 1 to 6, 1 to 8. These are scopes that are really jack of all trades.
They are. They're, in 1X, you've basically got, with an illuminated reticle, you've got a red dot sight, and then you have the ability to wind the magnification up to 4, 6, 8, or even 10X now with some of your higher end scopes. But it gives you really the best of both worlds in a pretty small, compact, lightweight package. Most of these scopes with the mount on them weigh around a pound or just a little over, and they're extremely versatile.
Yeah, I love the quick detach. You can take them on and off. If you have an issue with it, you can pop it off and you can use your backup irons. This is a 34 millimeter. It's a 1 to 8, and I believe this one's a 1 to 6. Sometimes, you've got you've got advantages with the 1 to 8 because you can a little more light transmission with this 34 millimeter compared to the 30 millimeter, which, it still gives you plenty of light, but this gives you a little bit of an advantage. But this is a heavier scope. It's thicker. It's bigger. And so, and 2 mount choices are going to come into play as well.
They are lots of different mount choices. If you're mounting it on an AR-15, you need to use what's called a cantilever mount, and that actually moves the scope forward like these have. So the cantilever mount, you want the back of your ocular at the rear here to be just above the top of the charging handle. And that gives you a good eye relief and still allows you access to your charging handle. If you just run straight up rings on it,
I don't know if I even have one with straight up rings. I've got some mounted. Oh, here's one, straight up rings.
There we go. So if you run a set of straight up rings like this on your AR-15, there's no way to get the scope mounted far enough forward to be and still keep the rings on the receiver. Sometimes if you got a big pick rail on the top of your handguard, you can mount it far enough forward on the handguard. I'm not a big proponent of that. No. I like for my rings to be mounted to the receiver itself, to the upper receiver. And the only way to do that on an AR and get the proper eye relief is with a cantilever mount.
But the one thing about these standard rings, other than an AR-15, is they're just smaller. They weigh less.
Right.
It really makes. I mean, some of these mounts, this one in particular, this is an American Defense mount. These things are great, quick detach, but it adds some weight.
It does. And they tried to skeletonize it as much as they could to pull as much weight out as possible. But it, with all the levers and everything, it does still add some extra weight to your rifle that you won't have with regular rings.
So 1 to 6, again, it is a larger scope. So you go away from the red dot, which is very, minimal, to something that's more capable. And so it just gives you some advantages there. And these have become very popular.
I tell you, for me personally, anything from contact distance to 600 yards has either a 1x6 or a 1x8 on it.
Right.
Because of a couple of reasons. One, the field of view that I have at any of the magnification ranges is much larger than any of your higher power variable scopes. So I've got a larger field of view for close-up stuff and still a larger field of view for distance shots as well.
Right. And I mean, these are just excellent scopes. I highly recommend them. One thing too about these particular is if you're thinking about more of a self-defense firearm, more than just a hunting option, which this will work for hunting too. But the self-defense option, that 1 to 6, and it's really the ACSS reticle is designed with this in mind.
That's right.
1 to 6. And so it's called, just it's a combat reticle.
Yeah, BDC, ballistic drop compensating reticle. So the reticle is graduated from 100 generally out to 600 yards with holdovers that you can use at each one of those yardage points. And it's calibrated with a specific projectile, generally either 69 grain projectiles in a 5.56 or 75 or 77 grain, depending on the manufacturer of the scope. And what a lot of people don't realize is out to 500 yards, those same numbers, those same hash marks will cross over to a 308.
Right. They do. And you can see it typically. And that's one thing to look for. Sometimes the reticles are on 300 blackout or 7.62 by 3.9 or some different calibers. And so when you're buying a scope, it does matter the caliber with a lot of these scopes.
That's right.
Especially if you have the bullet drop compensation. And I highly recommend having that because it really allows you to move away from Kentucky windage to getting a little more precise to take those precise shots.
Yeah.
And windage. They have actually wind holdovers. If the wind's going 5 miles an hour, it even has a hash mark to be able to lead into that.
Yep, for half value and full value winds. But, the big thing you want to look, just like Don was saying, you want to look at the scope before you buy it and see what the box says. Is it for a 5.56? Is it for a 308, a 7.62 by 39, 300 blackout supersonic or 300 blackout subsonic? A 300 blackout subsonic is not going to work on anything else. That's going to be very specific just to that particular cartridge. You can have some overlap with some of the other ones, but the blackout is very, very specific to that one cartridge.
And I'll just be quite honest. I've used scopes that weren't necessarily caliber rated on different calibers.
Oh, yeah.
And it worked. Yep. But it's not going to give you the optimum performance with that bullet drop.
That's right.
And two, it's according to the kind of reticle. And that's one thing too. I mean, you've got your standard hunting reticles with a post, and your crosshairs.
Yep. Fine duplex or a heavy duplex or the German reticles and stuff. They're great hunting scopes. They're great for 200 yards. You sight your rifle in at 100. At 200, you're going to be about 2 inches low. You can reach out to 300, and most cartridges are going to fall around a 12-inch drop at 300 or 1 mil. So that at 300 you're 9 to 12 inches low, and you can kind of hold over and factor for that. But really, past 300 yards, you've exceeded the limitation of that scope.
Right. And so this gives you just some capability to get out there. And of course, it takes practice. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of ranges out there that are over 100 yards for that matter. We're very fortunate at the Clinton House, where we're members. They have a mile range, which this is funny. And I do want to bring this up. When we were shooting the mile, we had a big PSA deal down, Palmetto State Armory deal down there. And so they were shooting at a mile. They set the scope magnification to 6 power. So you've got a scope over here that has 24 power, 18 power, but they had 6 power.
Yep.
And the reason why is because when you get out to those distances, any minute movement is going to move you all over the place.
Sure. Well, think about it like this. The more you magnify the scope, the more you magnify your wiggle.
Right? Yeah, that's right.
So you crank the magnification up to 30x, and you're going to see your heartbeat in the scope at distance. Every time it beats, it's going to go boom, 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 boom,
yeah,
and bounce up and down. Yeah. So lower magnification, and rule of thumb that I've always used is 2x for the first 100 yards and 1x of magnification for every 100 yards after that. And so 1,000 yards, you're only using 10 or 11x power. 2,000 yards, 20 or 21x.
Right.
And that really helps to minimize the movement, but still allow you to get a good visual view of your target.
Right. That's a great point. And we've shot quite a bit of 1,000 yards, and I highly recommend it if you ever get a chance. And there's a science to it.
Oh yes,
I mean it's pretty incredible. Okay, so illuminated reticles. Now we touched on that, especially with red dots. illuminated reticles. I mean, there's so many scopes now that have it.
Yeah.
It's a great advantage. I highly recommend it.
You know, the big thing with illuminated reticles are low light situations. You know, it's early morning, it's late evening, you're inside a dwelling or a house or inside a shady area where it's harder for you to see the reticle. That's where the illumination really, really shines, and the ability to be able to dial it and adjust the brightness to an individual situation. Or with a lot of your scopes now, with the electronics that are in them, they'll automatically adjust for you to different lighting conditions.
And you know, it's one thing like hunting. And I remember the first time I went hunting
Mhm.
with an illuminated reticle scope, it gives you an extension during your
yes.
time. Because when you're looking out there in the bush, and then you know you can't even see your reticle.
The black
It's dark.
reticle just disappears. Yep.
So if you have just a little bit of magnification, you can follow that reticle and you know where you are. Also, one thing about a lot of these scopes is the glass, how much light it allows. That also affects not just the size of the tube, but the glass. A lot of times, in a lot of, because the technology is getting there, where it's more light gathering. And so I know Burris, we had some that we were working with, and they were made for that, you know, picking up that extra time.
That's right. It's called the F factor. The higher the F factor number, you know, 1.2, 1.4, 1.6, 1.8, there's some scopes that get up in almost to 3 or maybe a little above 3. But the higher the F factor number, the more light gathering capability that scope has.
Okay, so now we're going to come up on some questions. I just want to give Sarah Mack a heads up if we have some. And we'll go ahead and take a little break and talk about that.
Ryan Clement asked, how do you guys feel about an LPVO with a red dot on a 45-degree mount for an AR?
Yeah, they work out really well. You know, the only downside to a 45-degree mount is if you're right-handed, it's canted off the right side of the gun. If it's left-handed, it's canted off the left side of the gun. And if for some reason you needed to switch to left hand on a right-handed dot, you have to roll the rifle into you, which is kind of awkward to be able to get to that red dot and use it. But other than that, they work very well, and it's a great option. It's a great close range option that's very fast. You know, guys that they shoot 3-gun have been doing it forever and a day, mounting a 45-degree optic. Just, you know, even before we had the red dots, we used to mount pistol sights at a 45-degree angle for close targets. And since the red dots have came along, you know, the old pistol sight rail has went away, and everybody switched over to mounting an optic at 45 degrees now.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about, is just mounting where you have your scope. You have a little sight on the side, and you can just turn it. And you know, like Magpul makes their offset sights, and I have those on. In fact, my go-to rifles have those. Instead of having the backups on the rail, I have those offset, so they kind of come down. You can flip them up. And that way I can just take the rifle and turn it. I don't have to remove my scope, because sometimes the scope will interfere with that sight being able to pop up.
That's right.
So, you know, but having a small little, you know, a lot of guys would use the Trijicon RMRs originally, you know, and just have it where you can just turn it.
Mr. Landfill asked, question, I live near Williams Gun Sight Company. They make scopes. Do you know if they have the optical clarity you guys were speaking of?
You know, I've used a ton of Williams sights over the years. They're iron sights, but I've never had any experience with any of their optics.
Yeah, their iron sights are excellent, excellent quality.
Yeah, their fire sights that they make are extremely bright with the fiber optic that they use. You know, and Williams has been around forever. Yeah. You know, I remember seeing stuff from them in, you know, gun magazines when I was a little kid. You know?
Right. So I would be, I mean, not knowing anything, we can't really answer that, but I would not be surprised if they had the quality they put in their other stuff.
Village Idiot asks, question for Sootch and Robbie, what do you think of Sightmark Reflex M-Spec?
Sightmark, some of their stuff is really, really good. They make some long range scopes that work real well. A lot of the guys that shoot the NRL 22 precision rifle matches are using the Sightmark scopes for those. But they've got good optical clarity. The target turrets adjust really well. They'll shoot an X box pretty close. So you know they're good scopes. You know, they're especially for the money. I mean,
right, but they're lower end stuff.
Yeah, they're mid range.
Yeah,
they're mid range. Their higher end stuff is more mid range priced.
Right.
Mary Jane asks, question, first year deer hunting and bought a new scope for my rifle. Any basic
Awesome.
scope adjustments for beginners?
Yes. So, your elevation knob is on top. That's going to adjust up and down. Your windage knob is on the right side. That's going to adjust left and right. And both of those should be marked with an arrow that you need to turn the scope for. They're generally marked for the arrow direction for up and the arrow direction for right. The biggest thing is don't try and go straight to 100 yards and sight the rifle in. Start off at about 25 yards, get the rifle on paper, adjust it, get it to center on paper at 25, then move to 50 yards and zero it at 50, and then go to 75, zero it at 75, and then your final zero at 100. It's going to take a little more ammunition, so you think, but overall, it's a lot faster and a lot easier than going to the range and you start shooting at a piece of paper and you're not even hitting it and have no idea where the bullets are going. So it's going to get your own target faster and get you zeroed in a lot quicker with less ammunition.
And it's according to who's mounting it. If you have a gunsmith to mount it,
Yep.
he'll level it out to where it's good. You want to make sure that elevation is, the windage is level.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's set in, because that will really affect your distance.
Yep.
Also, your eye relief. You want to make sure that when you look through that scope, you have a clear view. It's not like part of the scope is in the reticle and you're kind of trying to look and you're trying to get your head. You want to make sure that when you put that rifle up and you get your cheek weld, that it's a natural, wide open view.
Yeah. And the easy way to do that is to close your eyes, bring the rifle up to your shoulder and open your eyes. And you should have a full visual view of the scope with no blackouts anywhere around on it. If you're seeing black in any area, move your head back until it clears up, or move your head forward until it clears up, and then adjust the scope accordingly to that. A quick and easy tip that I can give you guys for mounting a scope is all of your scopes on the bottom here have a flat area. Let's see if you can see that on the bottom. Got that little flat area right there. When you mount your scope on top of your receiver, if you're using a one-piece rail, put a set of feeler gauges under the scope and rock it back and forth, and keep adding feeler gauges until you can't rock it back and forth anymore. Pull the feeler gauges out and snug your rings down, and that scope will be perfectly mechanically zeroed and leveled to the Picatinny rail on the receiver.
Yeah, that is a great tip. And I think there are some companies that actually make some adjustment parts for that. And it's according if you have high, low rings. And that's another thing, your rings. And it's according to what kind of mount you have.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you need to have that ring because maybe the objective lens is so big
that it hits the barrel,
and you don't want for the
any
scope
contact
to touch the barrel or touch anything on the firearm. You want it to be set up where just the mount set up.
That's right. I like at least 1/8 of an inch in between the objective and the barrel. So the gap in between, at least 1/8 of an inch. That's kind of the number that I always shoot for. If I can get 1/8 of an inch, I feel like it's really right where it needs to be.
Right. So good luck. That's awesome.
Randy Brown asks, can you find your target faster with optics?
Yes and no. So red dot optics, you've got a wide open field of view, which allows you to be able to pick up your target very quickly. If something is shaded or the sunlight is not hitting it correctly, a magnified optic in a lot of cases will allow you to pick up something a lot quicker. And then you've got to take in field of view as well. Field of view is how much area you can see from edge to edge on the scope at a given magnification. So, if you've got a 24x scope and you're shooting at 100 yards and you've got it cranked all the way up, your field of view may only be 8 or 10 feet at 100 yards. So you're from edge to edge, you're only seeing 8 to 10 feet. And that's going to make it really difficult for you to pick up things in your optic as well, which is another one of the reasons why I was talking about earlier. I only use 2x out to 100 and then 1x of magnification for every 100 yards after that, because it keeps my field of view as broad as possible to allow me to pick up targets as quickly as I can.
Yeah, especially if they're moving.
Yep.
But as far as irons versus magnet or any kind of optic, typically your optic, if you have it opened up,
right,
you're going to be able to find your target quicker.
Yep.
You don't have to put 1-to-1. It's like you've just got one dot to focus on.
Kevin Whitehead asks, how is optical clarity measured so we can compare with different scopes?
I don't know if they have a tool that actually measures it.
There's so many different companies and so many different types
Right.
of glass, quality of glass, clarity.
And then the lens coatings that they put on the glass as well, which aids in optical clarity too. So a lot of times what I use as kind of a gauge for me is what we were talking about earlier, is how clear the glass is all the way out to the edge. Your lower cost scopes, as you start getting out toward the edge of the glass all the way around, is going to be cloudy. And I've seen those that are cloudy from 1/8 of an inch in. So you've got an 1/8 of an inch ring all the way around the inside of the scope that's cloudy, all the way into like 1/4 of an inch or maybe a little more that's cloudy. And you'll see it when you look through the scope. Wind the magnification up on it, look through the scope, and don't look through the center, because the center is always going to be pretty clear on most scopes. Start looking out toward the edge, pick an object, focus on that object with the scope, and move the scope to where the edge of the glass is focused on what you're looking at, and see how clear it is there. But that's kind of the gauge that I use.
Frag Out Design Studios asked, do they make any EMP-proof battery-operated optics? That's my question.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of.
Mhm.
There may be some options out there because EMP protection has gotten bigger and bigger, but I don't know of any that
that actually advertise that as a selling point.
And there
with their
could
optic.
be. I just don't know about it.
So optics companies, there's a good selling point for you right now.
Again, make sure you have a etched reticle too.
Yeah.
Service Venator asked, question, it seems like a lot of people are moving towards an LPVO. Are these the best option between the traditional scope and a red dot?
I still like a variable power optic on my rifle. I like the ability to be able to dial it down to 1x if I'm up close, and the ability to wind it up to whatever I need for shooting out farther. So I'm a big variable power scope fan. I tend to keep my variable powers on the lower side compared to a lot of people, with the exception of my precision rifles. They've got some higher magnification scopes on them, not necessarily for magnifying for taking a longer shot, but for target detection at distance. And then I can dial the magnification back down once I've identified the target before I take the shot.
D Tanner 7 asked, question about canned goods. Any BPA concerns with the liners? Also, is it just me, or are cans getting more flimsy these days?
I'm sure that they're cutting back on the structural integrity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're cutting back in every area as food prices go up.
Yep.
I mean, whether it's portions or anything that they can take away from it, that's one of the things they do. The size down inflation kind of deal.
Yeah. And I would definitely think that there's there could be a long-term BPA issue with pretty much any of your canned foods. That's what they use to line and seal most of the cans.
But it does protect them from that taste, that metallic taste.
Yep.
But again, I think if you've got canned food held back for survival, I think
BPA be pretty low on the
BPA
list.
is low on my threat list.
Yep.
Ryan Clement asked, question, do you have any experience with Swamp Fox optics? If so, how does it compare to a Vortex?
I've heard some good things about Swamp Fire. Swamp Fox. I've heard some, if I could remember what it was. Some Swamp Fox.
And I've used a few of them and had pretty good results with it. I would say that they compare very evenly with the Vortex line of sights. As far as durability, reliability, glass, optical clarity, glass clarity, and then the design and the shape of the hood that's over the glass for protection, it is very similar to the Vortex.
Okay, let's get into. We're going to hold off because we're getting close on time, so we want to make sure that we hit one of the big ones.
That's right.
This is the fully magnified optic, variable power. Gets up to really high magnification.
That's right.
And
your long range optics.
Right, long range optics.
Yep.
And like Robbie said, and I thought that was a really good point, is having that high magnification allows you to identify your target, and then you could actually bring it back if you want.
Yep. And one of the big features that you get with a higher magnification optic that a lot of times you won't see on your lower magnification optics is parallax adjustment. Mm-hmm. What a parallax adjustment is it allows you to minimize the amount of parallax in a scope at a given distance. Most of your 1x6s, your 1x8, stuff like this, these are going to have a fixed 100-yard parallax. That's just how they're designed. That's the number that most companies use. So with your larger, higher magnification scopes, you've actually got an external parallax adjustment knob, so you can dial the parallax at different distances. And basically what parallax is as you move your head on the reticle, you can see the reticle move. At distance, if you don't have the correct parallax dialed in, you can actually shift your point of impact by a different head position on the optic itself. So by adjusting the parallax, it fixes the parallax at that specific distance. So even if your eye isn't perfectly centered with the reticle, you're still going to have a center shot.
And two, like a lot of times, if I'm really looking for pinpoint accuracy,
Yep.
Now we can hit man-sized targets with a red dot at 300 yards, but we're not necessarily making a big small type.
You're not shooting dimes at 300,
right? And so this allows you to really focus in and get some really incredible accuracy. That's why you see these on snipers,
exactly,
sniper scopes.
Right. You've got the illuminated reticle, you've got the parallax adjustment, you've got large, easy to see target turrets to where you can dial your elevation, you can dial for wind holds. You know, if you've got your Kestrel out and you make wind calls, you can dial an adjustment for that wind call. And there's so much ballistic software out there now that really helps you in factoring or figuring a ballistic solution, that it makes these things almost effortless to use. You know, if you understand how to read the wind and how to read mirage, elevation is a constant. You know, that's one of those things that if you know your temperature, barometric pressure, and humidity, the rise and fall of the bullet at any given distance is an easy mathematical calculation. Wind is the one that generally gets most people because they either factor for too much wind or not enough wind. And that's one of those things that having a lot of experience behind the rifle in different conditions really is the only way to get really good at making wind calls.
Right. Right. And then two, larger objective lenses allow more light transmissions.
Yep.
You know, a lot of times you can put sunshades on here to cut the glare. There's just a lot of things. But yeah, if we're like when we go to 1,000 yards, we don't take the 1:8 or 1:6.
No.
We take the higher magnification scopes. And, you know, that way we can really dial in on a specific target and get even small targets with something like this where we may miss. Or we may get close, or we may even hit, but we're not able to get the precision that we can with the long range.
Well, and with the higher magnification scopes, you can actually spot the trace off of your bullet, which is basically the contrail coming off of the bullet as it cuts through the water vapor or humidity in the air. So you can actually see the bullet go up and drop down into the target. And it's once you get used to seeing it and know what you're looking for, you can call a hit by the time the bullet's halfway to the target. You know if it's going to hit it or if it's going to drop below it or go above it.
Wow. Yeah, that's right. Now, there is one thing that we didn't cut. Well, first and second focal plane. I think that's important.
That's a huge thing to talk about. A lot of your lower end scopes are going to be second focal plane. And that means that the reticle size is fixed. It doesn't matter what magnification you have it on, that reticle stays the same size. 1x, it's the same. 10x, 20x, whatever, that reticle always stays the same size inside your scope.
It's behind the adjustment.
Correct. And with a first focal plane scope, the reticle actually gets larger or smaller as you wind through your magnification range. For long range shooting, most guys really prefer the first focal plane scope because you don't have a potential of shifting your shot off target. With a second focal plane scope, you generally zero the rifle at the lowest magnification setting or the highest magnification setting, and know that as you dial in between those two, your point of impact is going to shift some. Where with a first focal plane scope, you don't get that point of impact shift as you wind through your magnification range.
And typically the first focal planes have been traditionally more expensive.
They have been, quite a bit more expensive. It's cheaper and easier to manufacture a second focal plane scope than it is a first focal plane because the majority of the glass in a first focal plane is etched, where with the second focal planes, a lot of those are not etched reticles.
Right. but it does give you, well, and the cost has come down on the first focal planes. So if you're looking at first or second, and I'll tell you, it's kind of funny because I've been shooting second focal plane forever. Yeah. And when I got my first focal plane, of course, it's been a number of years ago now, but when you crank it up, that reticle goes, it gets big in the glass. And but it gives you a lot more precision. You can see a little better, when you're making that pinpoint shot. Now there are fixed optics.
Yep, that's one we
4
didn't
powers,
cover. Fixed 4X, fixed 6X. 30 years ago, that was generally the go-to for a lot of guys with their hunting rifle was just a fixed 4X or a fixed 6X.
Right.
I remember my first hunting rifle had a Ted Williams fixed 6X with a 32 millimeter objective on it. That was what a lot of rifles had. And, a lot of guys use those very successfully for decades. And, it's been really nice to see the progression with optics over the years and how much they've improved.
Now they do make, and they still make them. They still make the fixed.
Oh yeah.
But then we have some of these like Prism scopes. This is primary arms. It's a 3-power scope. It's fixed power.
3-power. Yep.
It has the ACS reticle. You have your diopter. You have a lot of factors with it. And what's funny is a lot of guys that just like to go out and shoot, they don't even adjust their turrets. Right. They get it on one point, and that's what they use anyway. So, but this is a Prism scope, so it's built like a tank. I think they fired these off 50 caliber machine guns quite a bit. And so these are tough, sights. So it may be something that you're like, you know what? I don't want to bother with all that. I just want some magnification. This is what I want. So, and then the 3 to 9s, those were like the big popular hunting scopes.
The
3 to
gold
9
standard forever.
And they're still available. They're still great optics. It's just that there's a lot of new additional things that have upped the game and have gotten us a little bit more precise. Okay. And then we have the long eye relief. We're going to have to tone it out because we're at 1 o'clock already. But long eye relief scopes is where you put the scope out. And so, that's really typically for your scout rifle.
Right. A lot of people refer to it as a scout scope or a scout rifle scope because it mounts out more toward the center of the rifle instead of back, around 3.5 inches from your eye.
Right. So it allows you to be able to pick it up. And for game, it makes it really fast. We've done a number of things with scout setups. And in fact, my Steyr, I have a Steyr Scout. And it has the mount way up front. And you put it on there. And it's that long eye relief. So you're able to, you can get a really wide field of view. It's great for tracking. Yep. It's just a lot of cool things about it.
And most of those are most of your scout scopes are a lower magnification. They generally are a 2 to 7 power scope is what most of your scout scopes are. So you still have a good magnification range, but you have the ability to dial it down and have a huge field of view, which for a scout rifle, which is designed for quick target acquisition and fast shooting, is really ideal.
And that was Jeff Cooper's brainchild, which was pretty cool.
Yes, it was.
Night vision is a whole other animal. We won't even get into that. We did talk about that a while back, but maybe we'll have another episode. But anyway, time is out.
I know, already.
Time has blown by. We have a lot. And honestly, we were trying to keep this as simple as we could, but there's just so much to optics. So hopefully we've helped you. Maybe that you had a certain idea for a rifle. You're going out to buy a scope. Hopefully this will give you some good choices, or maybe you want a new scope, or maybe we've talked you into picking up a new scope for different various reasons. There's so many different ideas, so many different things that you want to do with them. And so it gives you just a lot of choices. So that's the big thing. Don't get like overwhelmed. Just go, you know what? I have a lot of choices. So any of these scopes will work for a lot of close, just medium ranges.
That's right.
So this gives you either close in, out to distance. So we really appreciate Sarah Mack for taking care of the questions and monitoring the comments. Big thanks to Robbie Wheaton for being here and just giving us a lot of knowledge. Robbie has done quite a bit of long range shooting, set up some long range shooting matches, has done a lot. So it was really good to have him here to get into some of the details.
I brought the big brain today.
Yeah, I'm sitting over here going, huh? Okay, not really. But we really do appreciate it. And hopefully it'll help you. And that's the whole reason we're here today. So we're going to go ahead and sign off, but check out Robbie Wheaton at wheatonarms.com. Also, Wheaton Arms YouTube channel, great resource. And we just really appreciate you guys for being here today. Be strong, be of good courage. God bless America. Long live the Republic.